The 17th through the 19th. Before you start throwing stuff at me, yes, that's the weekend of the OU Nebraska game. But here's the kind of way I look at it. That's the last game, probably between two Big 12, because Oklahoma's going to the SEC.
True.
Cheer it up, cheer it up, give it up. All right, so we're doing that on the 17th through the 19th, Broken Bow. We got a special deal, great rate. Committee, we worked hard to do this, but we went to the AAPL and they gave us a grant. So the cost, now listen to me, $100.
Oh, nice.
So that's two nights, accommodations in nice cabins at Broken Bow, great place, great area. We got great speakers. You're gonna get 10 CPL credits, 10 for $100. Wow. Can't get a deal like that. So what about the ball game? Well, we got a 50-yard line seat. We got free food, so you don't have to stand in line at the ball game. You don't have to fight traffic. You don't have to stand in line. You don't have to find a place to park, because we got plenty of parking. We got plenty of food. We got plenty of drink. So hey, we don't only have a few spots left open. So if you're interested in going, see Teresa or see me, we'll get you signed up. $100. You can't beat that deal.
So,
come sign up.
You're going too.
oh yeah.
All right.
You don't have to be a landlord.
Thank you.
I don't give a shit. $100 is $100.
$100 for Broken Bow for a weekend?
I didn't even know I was gonna get paid.
Okay, tonight we have a very special speaker, the one and the only, the hot take of the day, Mr. David Ramsden-Wood, DRW. Woo! 2 last names. So, David Ramsden-Wood was the co-founder and COO of One Energy Partners, the creator of Hot Take of the Day. He began his career in energy as a reservoir engineer for Anadarko in 2001. Throughout his career, he has held roles across the analytical spectrum, including completion and production engineering and business development. David is passionate about the future and the face of the oil and gas industry and the evolution of the energy industry as a whole. David's daily hot take of the day is seen by approximately 30,000 people, professionals, and can be found on LinkedIn following the hashtag and now at hottakeoftheday.com and his podcast. So David came all the way down from Denver, so this is a special treat for us. So give your hand, put your hands together in a warm welcome to David Ramsden-Wood.
All right. To use Matthew McConaughey. You know that I also didn't write that bio because it sounds absolutely nothing like me. I would have said something more offensive. So today, in fairness, I don't actually follow slides. So we have a slideshow, we'll send it out. There's some interesting graphics. I'm probably the worst slide maker in human history. But I want to focus on data, I want to focus on narrative, and I want to give you guys just things to think about. I hope you don't agree with most of the things you say. And if you follow me on LinkedIn at the Hot Take of the Day, who follows me on LinkedIn? Anyone? Okay, so for you, you guys know what's coming. For everyone else, put on a helmet. We're going to see how we go. We're going to talk about virtue signaling. We're going to talk about ESG. We're going to talk about where the power for Tesla comes from, right? Because if you plug in your Tesla, you know it's coming straight from solar panels, right? That's how the electric grid works. But first, it's a little bit of a bait and switch. You know, we're getting into 2022 with the election cycle. I want to spend 47 slides talking about reasons to vote for Joe Biden. So here's the first one. Really not a lot to say. All the other 46 look exactly the same, so we're just going to skip past reasons to vote for Joe Biden and talk about the rest of it. Timeline of events. How did we get here? Does anyone feel like 2020 was like the worst? Can I swear? I'm going to swear. Oh, yeah. Was the worst fucking year ever, right? Like, it was horrible. And it compressed everything in terms of where our industry was going and how we were going to get there. When I started the Hot Take of the Day, and I said this to the Chesapeake guys, unfortunately I had the misfortune of being fired. Who's been fired in this room? Okay, yeah, I like it. Well, you're all landmen, so of course you've been fired. So I wrote this book in 2012 after I got fired, and it's called, obviously, What the Fuck is Wrong with Everybody Else? What They Didn't Teach You in Business School. There's a couple like little gems in there. And for those who are fired, I got to do something that not a lot of people got to do. I was invited to a meeting where, you know how you kind of feel like you're gonna get fired? Does everyone have this feeling? Maybe you haven't been fired before, but I knew it was coming. For like months I knew it was coming. My boss would like see me and like change directions and stuff. So I got an org design meeting at 12:15 at lunch for 4:30. Now, on a Wednesday, no one does org design, especially since my org was already designed. And I was hitting golf balls at the time. And so I saw it and I knew this is like the meeting that I'm being invited to be fired. So I did what everyone who's been fired would like to do. I declined the meeting request. Yeah? So anyway, so I wrote this book in 2012 about when I realized that I wasn't as important as I thought I was, and I wasn't as smart as I thought I was, and that I could easily be fired. Then I talked to a publisher when we sold our company in 2018, and they said, there's 4,000 books a day that are published in the United States. Like, who's going to read it? Does anyone follow? Do you have social media? I didn't have social media, so I started the Hot Take of the Day. And in 2018, the thing that actually got the Hot Take of the Day taken off was I wrote an open letter to 3 of my favorite operators, EOG, Concho, and Pioneer. And I said, Dear EOG, Concho, and Pioneer, do you not understand the first fucking thing about supply and demand? I know this is on LinkedIn, right? So no one's swearing, no one in oil and gas is saying this. About supply and demand, if you don't stop growing your rigs, and if you don't start paying down your debt, and if you don't start doing all of these things, oil is going to crash. It makes no sense for us to be growing oil at 10%. Do you remember in 2020 when we were having COVID? And remember COVID? That's a thing, apparently. So United Airlines came out and warned about revenue in February. Under Armour warned about revenue in February. Nike warned. Amazon warned. Google warned. You know what our oil and gas brethren did in February 2020 announcing their Q4 earnings? They said, we're growing oil by 10%. No. SM came out and said, we're growing oil by 15%. Other guys were going 18%. In a global market where there was 1% growth from 100 million barrels a day, the US had the intelligent wisdom of coming out saying, we're going to grow 10 to 15%. They were going to invest 100% of their cash flow to grow production into an oil market that didn't need it at a time when every other company in the world was saying COVID might be bad, we're going to lower our revenue expectations. When I started the Hot Take of the Day, I was suggesting some of this, but we didn't do it, did we? The great news is, and so this is like the punchline of the speech, is oil is now 71 and gas is now roughly $4. And if you think about the inventory in the United States for both gas and oil, and you think about the capital discipline and the ESG, all of which we're going to talk about, this is probably the price. Of course, will we see 50? Probably. Will we see 100? Probably. But this like 71 and 4, at least from a mechanical standpoint, we're almost out of the global inventories, right? Like when we look back to March and February of March and April of last year, there was 100 million barrels a day of oil being produced. We shut the world down for 45 days, but we continued to produce 35 million barrels a day extra. I went on CNBC. It was one of the only times I got to go on CNBC. That was fun. And I went on Fast Money, and Brian Sullivan said, what's going to happen to oil? I said, well, it's going to zero. He's like, what do you mean it's going to zero? I'm like, we're overproducing 35 million barrels a day in the world. No U.S. operator has shut down. The Saudis increased from 10 million to 12 million barrels a day. Remember that? That was fun. And there's nowhere to store it. So as soon as there's no more storage, oil goes to zero. And I admit, I'm wrong on a lot of things. I was definitely wrong on that. Oil did not hit zero. It hit negative 37. So I really think that where we're at right now, oil 71, gas is 4. I think that's a run rate. And I think that the ESG pressure that we're going to talk about, it's here to stay. Whether we like it or not, there was an expression that was said, and everyone's getting a cup of coffee on it, right? Like no one's fighting it, saying this is stupid, this is dumb. It's just easier to make money. That's what bankers do. Bankers want to take your money for retirement, and they charge you a 1% management fee, even though they're just buying the S&P, right? So in ESG, it's exactly the same thing. You get a stamp on it that says, I have renewably sourced, happily sourced gas. Boom, pay me $100,000, make a press release, everyone's happy. So everyone's going to the trough to make money on ESG, but it's not going away. So we need to embrace that and think about it. This is my favorite slide. I used to think that money was made in terms of like the flow. So everyone feels like the flow in energy, like private equity. How much money is going to new startup teams in Oklahoma these days? Anybody? No. So it's the flow of money that is how bankers in New York make their money and how private equity makes their money, because at the end of the day, they only care about assets under management. They charge a 2% fee and they make 20% of the profits. And so they don't care if it's batteries or solar or wind or ESG or whatever. They will put their money wherever and they will sell their grandma for a nickel because they get 2% and 20% of the profits. And so the problem right now with energy, whether we like it or not, whether we need it for the world, which is what we're going to talk about, whether you need it or not, the bankers will not put the money here because the flow is not coming here. And so even though we saw an incredible flow for equity values going from, when did the vaccine come out? November 9th, that was convenient, like 3 days after the election? 6 days after the election? Anyway, so, but oil went in a straight line from 40 to 73. And so everything traded up. But not many companies issued equity, did they? The only equity issuance we've really seen has been mergers. And all of the debt has been refinanced because the flow is coming a little bit. But like the refinancings are at 9.75%. Who works for Laredo? Anyone here? Anyone like Laredo here? No, I was just kidding. I like Laredo. Jason Paga and I used to work together in Anadarko. But they came out with debt at a time when interest rates are zero, and Laredo refinanced at 9.75%. So like, bankers are going to take that, right? Like, good luck getting 9.75% anywhere else. So that's why it's important to understand that our industry is punished because of the flow. No one cares about our industry, and the flow is into batteries and solar and wind and Green New Deal and all this wonderful ESG, diversity and inclusion, which really goes well for my white kids. Okay, so there's a second piece to this which is important for BlackRock. Who has heard of BlackRock? Anyone? Okay, if you haven't heard of BlackRock, you should. Their CEO is Larry Fink. And Larry Fink every year writes a letter in January. He has one that's Dear Investors. Now, most of you don't know, you probably own BlackRock ETFs, right? They have a huge passive investment. So when you go and you buy like an ETF on the market to mirror the S&P, BlackRock, 33% of their assets under management are these ETFs. So they control a lot of your money. And instead of them just saying, well, look, I'm just managing the money. I own the S&P. I have no votes. No, they vote with that. So Larry every January comes out with a Dear Investors email, letter, and a Dear CEOs letter. And the Dear Investors is we care about climate, we care about CO2, and we care about all these things. And amazingly, they're investing in the companies that are solving those problems, right? So that's weird. Why would you? Yeah, okay. And then the Dear CEOs is basically, if you don't do this, I control all the money and I will fuck you up. Now, I mean, it's like a longer letter than that, but basically that's what it says. And so it's important to read that letter every January to see where it's going. And starting in 2020, that was the first letter that said climate change is an existential threat. Now, we can debate till the cows come home about whether hurricanes are up or hurricanes are down. What I can tell you factually is that in cities, the temperature is 10 degrees Fahrenheit higher than the rural areas because we have buildings and concrete. Now, it turns out that when we measure temperature, we also do it in cities. So yes, New York is warmer today than it was in 1910. It's because there's more buildings. Now, Houston, if you've ever been, there are more roads stacked on top of roads than any other city in America. It's also in a swamp. And so when a hurricane comes and you've built out all this land and there's concrete everywhere, there is nowhere for it to drain. So by definition, we are going to have worse climate events, right? But nobody says that. We build because humans want to live in Minnesota. And I don't know if you've been to Minnesota in January, but it is minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit, which sucks. People want to live in Houston in July, and it's 105 and 100% humidity. So we climate change by inventing air conditioning and building houses out of trees. So we cut down trees, we build houses, we build energy, we do things. We change the environment by definition. And what is not being talked about is, yes, is the climate warming? It appears that it is. Are we to blame for the CO2 increase? Probably. It was 280, it's now 410. We extract carbon from the earth, we burn it. But what is being missed in all of these conversations are trade-offs, right? And so what I would message to everyone here is we can have that conversation. Yes, fossil fuels are bad, but also, as we'll talk about in the Texas crisis, we can turn it on and turn it off. And I am not personally prepared to give up my car. I like to Uber for people, right? And if I don't have a car, I talked to Clay Gaspard today, so I will give him credit for this. He said to someone who was pushing back and saying, well, you know, it's just so expensive. Where can you take $4 and move 2,000 pounds of your shit 27 miles? And how much would you like to pay to move 2,000 pounds of your shit 27 miles? Because it sure is not $4. And if you want to go see your cousin in Austin, right? How far is Austin from here? Like 300 miles? Am I even close? 800 miles? 400 miles?
400.
Like one tank of gas, like 19 charges on a Tesla, but one tank of gas. And so for $40, you're totally mobile. That is the power of fossil fuels. And no one is talking about the trade-offs. Yes, maybe the climate's getting warmer, but like none of us like people in Miami anyway. So just let it flood, move inside, we'll be fine. So follow BlackRock. Now the IEA, who follows the IEA? Does anyone read these pieces of shit papers? Okay, so the IEA is the International Energy Agency, which should just be renamed We Hate Fossil Fuels and Everyone in the Industry Should Die, but instead we're funded by solar and wind and governments and we want to terrify people into investment. It's a very long name, but that's what the IEA stands for. And so when they came out with their report that was much ballyhooed and talked about in the media, they said, and this is my favorite sentence in the entire presentation. The IEA said, reaching net zero by 2050 requires further rapid deployment of available technologies, as well as widespread use of technologies that are not on the market yet. Which really means that when fairy dust and unicorn farts are powering our country, then that is the technology that we need to rely on. But we all know, again, from trade-offs, what is the thing we're missing? Batteries, right? And all of the batteries in the world, there's a great podcast, and I'm going to recommend for those podcast listeners to listen to. Robert Bryce, who wrote A Question of Power, Faster, Longer, Stronger, Slower, Deeper. He's written a lot of books. Great book, great author, great podcast, very informative. One of his episodes was with the Kauai Electric utility. In Hawaii, there's no natural gas, right? They don't want windmills because they kill birds. They kill big birds, little birds, all the birds, and they're very loud and they flash all the time and people hate it. But even though that the Hawaiians were protesting the shit out of many of these windmills, no one covers that on the news, do they? So Robert had a guy from Kauai Electric on, and Hawaii, with all the solar, all the hydro, no natural gas, pays 33 cents a kilowatt hour. Now it turns out Hawaii averages 80 degrees Fahrenheit always. So you don't really need air conditioning and you don't really need heating. So their people only use 3,000 kilowatt hours per person. Onshore United States, we use 12,000. A third of the world uses less than 1,000 kilowatt hours, which is less than your fridge. And so they pay 33 cents a kilowatt hour. The average price onshore is 12, and we use 4 times the power. They have batteries and solar, and the batteries can only hold 5 hours of charge. So again, we talk about wind and solar and how it's going to save the world, and we talk about the Texas power crisis, which we'll come back to, but no battery was going to power Texas or Oklahoma or Colorado or Minnesota because it was cold everywhere, and no battery was going to power for more than 5 hours. And so the problem that I have, I don't care what your view of climate change is, we are talking trade-offs. You will freeze if it's minus 15, and so you'll either turn on your stove, which is natural gas, or you will burn down trees. And there are more than 4 million people in the world that die from indoor pollution because they cook their food on wood and dung. So COVID, 600,000 people, 90% were comorbidities, cool. 4 million people a year die because they can't get electricity or power and there's no access to it. But somehow we're going to shut it down. Those are the trade-offs. And so when you're having these conversations, those are facts. You can just use them, talk to them, share them with people, and the IEA is a joke. Here is just a couple stats again. I'm going to send this out. You can look at it. But things that they're projecting. Right now, electric vehicles, so this is the one on the bottom. It doesn't matter where it is. You won't even see them anyway. The electric vehicle shares in stock of vans right now, 0% in 2020, and they're projecting that it's going to be 84% by 2050. That's how we're going to solve this. We have annual battery demand in electric vehicles in terawatt hours. Currently, we're at 0.16, but it's going to be 14 in 2050. Who has $48,000 to buy a Chevy Bolt? You know, the same Chevy Bolts that they recommended you shouldn't charge overnight because they might burn your house down because they've been spontaneously combusting. You shouldn't park them in indoor garages because if a fire in a battery hits in an indoor garage, that whole place comes down. So you basically have an electric car for $48,000 that can't carry $2,000 worth of shit. Doesn't go 300 miles, and you can't charge it when you're home. Doesn't that sound like a great car? I don't know if I want that. So I'm not sure I totally believe the projections. So imagine the future. We're going to talk about the Paris Accord. Does everyone know that China and India are considering a developing country? Does China feel like a developing country to you? So nonetheless, while we're deindustrializing the United States by making us have net carbon and we're shutting down all the things we do, the Indian Point Power Facility, which is a nuclear facility that has 2,000 megawatts of power and can power 25% of New York City, which, by the way, the week after that it happened, New York had a power crisis. Did everyone see that? No one linked it to the fact that they'd shut down the nuclear facility, but it was 2,000 megawatts of power in New York that we're just shutting down. It makes absolutely no sense. And the Paris Accord says that China and India are exempt from CO2 emissions until 2030. Does everybody know that? Did you know that? They're building 350 coal plants right now in the world, and most of those are in India and China. And so if we really cared about climate change, what would we do? We wouldn't be shutting down our power facilities, and we wouldn't be turning to wind and solar here. We'd be taking the solar panels that China is currently building because they have all of the critical earth and rare earth minerals. 60% of the supply comes out of China. We would build those and we would install them in China because there's no such thing as a no peeing section in a pool. I've tried. I pee here, people get mad over there, right? And so when China is emitting massive amounts of CO2 and growing, and the US is shrinking, China and Asia, do you know the population of that is 4.4 billion people? Many of whom don't have the electricity that we have. Which brings me to this slide. China, since 1998, has grown emissions every year and is now at 9.4 billion tons. The US and Europe combined is 8.6. So we're going to solve climate change by excluding the number one polluter. And this makes sense. And we're not going to invest any money to help China convert to solar, convert to wind. Here's a little known stat that people don't talk about. China and India have the fourth and fifth largest coal reserves in the world. Now, I know 2019 feels like 15 years ago, because it certainly does to me, but there was a trade war going on before the Wu flu kind of helped knock out Trump, remember? And so if you're in a trade war with China, and they have coal reserves, and we have natural gas reserves, you think they're going to move their entire economy over to natural gas when they don't really have it, but they have coal? And unlike the IEA that says we have to base our future on technologies that may not exist, China doesn't do may not exist. China does we have coal, and those stupid Americans over there keep sending us work and sending us business, which is why if you look at the US electricity consumption, going back to 2000, we basically haven't grown. Now, that's a problem, as we know in oil and gas. The reason I started this speech talking about the oil and gas companies, we're going to grow production. Because when you grow production, when you grow users, when you grow clicks, when you grow eyeballs, when you grow ad revenue, you're a growth story. And bankers love to flow money into you when you're a growth story. But electricity demand in the United States has gone nowhere in 20 years. So the only way that you can be a growth industry, like a utility, is not to grow, is to tear down all of your existing infrastructure and rebuild all of your existing infrastructure with the new shit. And so if we just look at the Green New Deal, $3 trillion, what do you think the profit margin on from building, manufacturing, installing, distribution, your electricity bill at home, 10% is the cost of power, 90% is distribution. And oh, by the way, electric companies have a regulated rate of return at 10.4%. So if they spend $1 billion in capital every year, they make a guaranteed $100 million of profit, which is amazing because that's where Doug Lawler pulled out of Chesapeake. No, that was not fair. That was not a fair. It was not a fair statement. It was funny, but it wasn't very fair. But so the point is, nobody cares. Like, remember when I said everyone's getting on the ESG bandwagon? Nobody cares about what they're spending money on. There's a 30% margin on the $3 trillion that they're advocating, which is $1 trillion of something going to probably 10 people. And like we saw Jeff Bezos is doing pretty good. He's shooting penises into the sky, right? How about him talking about climate? He has the Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle, and he's burning more CO2 just going to the moon. I didn't even go to the moon. He just flew into space and came home.
Maybe.
Dude, that guy's got an ego. And this is coming from a guy with an ego. Okay, let's talk about the wind and power February crisis, ERCOT. Everyone remembers that? February
Yeah.
1st to 15th? So this is the data that they didn't say. I always laugh. Bloomberg, February 16th, came out and said, wind and solar are not to blame for what happened in Texas. We didn't expect it to be windy or sunny, so we didn't count on it. Damn that natural gas. Now, this is the data. Oh my God, that was bad. Okay, so blue is nuclear, gray is coal, green is wind, yellow is solar, and red is natural gas. Now, ERCOT made some mistakes, as did the oil industry, because we weren't classed as critical infrastructure. And so when it looked like it was going to get cold on February 10th, ERCOT wrote a whole bunch of companies and said, we need to take power down because we need to save it for the consumers. So what did they do? They did what anyone would do. They shut in ESPs for oil wells, and they shut in pumps for saltwater disposal. So it turns out, like Endeavor had 300 million cubic feet a day shut in because they lost 5 ESPs. 5 saltwater disposal wells. Because once your tanks fill up, there's nowhere to go. And once the flow stops, things freeze. So that was stupid on ERCOT's part. That was stupid on the oil industry's part for not pushing back and saying, like, if we need the gas, we need the gas. But like, you can't turn wind on. So in Texas, there's 30,000 megawatts of installed capacity. And at any time ERCOT shows you the real-time capacity, it's like 6 to 12 gigawatts being done, which is like 20% capacity. So even if we were to triple the amount of wind at peak, we still have half the demand. But at the lows, which you see here, it wasn't blowy when it's cold. And power demand in the summer peaks at 4 p.m. It's not windy at 4 p.m., it's windy at 2 a.m. So this is not a solution. That's the data. So yes, did natural gas fail? It did, because we couldn't get it there. But without natural gas, the entire grid would have failed, and no one is talking about that. That's the data. That's important to know. Here's the wind and solar. In terms of peak demand, we're not going to talk about that. Don't need to. Let's talk more about world energy use. And I pulled this slide from the BP statistical. And so we talk so much about renewables. If you heard as much renewable talk as there is, wouldn't you assume that the percentage of renewables currently used to generate power in the world was like 30%? It's the only thing you hear. Well, the renewables, for the record on this slide, is the orange thing on the top. Now, oil is green, red is natural gas, and gray is coal. All those other colors are all the other power sources used in the world. But for the amount we talk about them, you really feel like they're really probably helping us, yeah? So I like this one, energy use by region. So what I have is the total average consumption per person as the bottom number, and I have the population of that region on the top. So we're going to go from left to right to orient yourself. North America, South and Central America, Europe, CIS, which is Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, that whole area, Middle East, Africa, and Asia. Population of all of North America is 579 million people, and we use 220 joules per person. Now, you go to Africa, there's 1.2 billion, and they use 20. So we have double the population in a country who currently uses 10% of the power we use in the United States. So our climate goals that we're trying to do is just literally saying, Africa, like, I hope you like burning dung, because that's what they're doing. And so I'm not out here to say, oh, world poverty. I don't care about poor people, I really don't. And I don't care about the world poverty, and I don't care about access to energy. I care about my family. I care about the people in my city. I care about the people in my state. I care about our country. I care about everything we have. But the reality is, everyone is laughing at our country because they have 90% less power use than we do, and we have the audacity to say, you guys don't get to burn power like we do. We'll just keep doing it. How many environmentalists have turned in their cars? How many don't fly? How many don't own plastics? How many didn't take the vaccine that was transported in a truck that used diesel with refrigeration that takes incredible amounts of power, probably powered by natural gas. Even the Tesla in Colorado, 75% of the power is generated by natural gas and coal, and I literally talk to people who think that they are being charged by wind and sun. It's crazy because we're not having these conversations, and the media will not allow the conversation. And so again, these are just the chats that you can have with your friends, because this is all data. I am going to do just a little, we want to talk about narrative. I have to say this about coronavirus. I'm going to ask two questions. So the point is, everyone in industry, in the media that's telling you these news headlines, Walmart, did everybody see that Walmart is now forcing their employees to get vaccinated? They came in after Google, which, just by the record, Google made $38 billion in Q1 of 2020 pre-coronavirus. Do you know how much they made in Q1 2021? $62 billion, up 62%, and their stock doubled, and their CEO is worth more than $1 billion, and he gets paid $1.9 million a year in salary. So Google, who is responsible for 92% of search, somehow oil and gas is like a cartel and we collude to make prices high, and Google has 92% of search that sells free articles for ads. You think Google has an incentive to screen users to keep them scared so they stay home when their revenue is up 62% and their stock is up double? How about this one? Moderna didn't really exist as a company, never made a commercial vaccine before. They're going to have $20 billion of revenue in 2021. 90% is from the vaccine. Their chief medical officer sold $50 million worth of stock between February 1st of 2020 and February 1st of 2021. Their stock is up 1,300%. So what happens if there's no booster shot? Revenue goes down 90%, their stock goes to zero, the company basically disappears. So do you think booster shots are coming anytime soon? Yeah. And fortunately, we have Dr. Scott Gottlieb, if anyone watches CNBC, the former FDA chair, who's out there constantly telling you how terrified you need to be and you need to get the shot. And even though the CDC doesn't say it, it's not a big deal. So Scott Gottlieb is on the board of Pfizer. He's on the board of Pfizer. 25% of Pfizer's $60 billion of revenue this year is coming from the COVID vaccine. They have a high 20s rate of return, and $8 billion of their profit is coming from it. So, like, again, I don't mean to be cynical, but it's hard not to be when the guy whose stock account is being reflected by the numbers is saying it. So when you hear about climate change, and when you think about energy, and when you think about fossil fuel, none of them own fossil fuel companies. Harold Hamm isn't on television all the time talking about how he's going to go. And man, if Aubrey McLennan was here, can you imagine what he'd be saying to CNBC? But Mike Wirth and Darren Woods and others are not on television fighting the good fight because it's just easier to bury your head in the sand because we're not getting the flow. And that is why ESG is here to stay. And so it's an unfortunate state, but we have to just communicate with our neighbors and say, here are the facts, here's the data, it's all available. And unless we want to keep Africa at 20 joules per person when the US is 10 times that and half the population, we have no choice but fossil fuels. Skip that one. I like this one. So Tesla finally made profit for the first time. Did everybody know that Tesla has not been a profitable company for the last eternity? And this quarter was the first one they made a profit. They made $1 billion. But previously in Q4, they made Q3, I apologize, they made net income of $359 million. $387 million they made from sales of EV carbon credits. Now let's analyze that. The state of California has implemented efficiency rules, and if car companies want to sell, they have to buy the credits. The place they buy them from is Tesla. So Tesla made $387 million selling carbon credits to other companies, and their profit was $359 million, which meant that the net $23 million came from the sale of carbon credits. Now, it's also interesting because in order to get on the S&P, you need to have, I think it's 20 consecutive quarters of profitability. So the carbon credits made Tesla profitable, and when they went in the S&P, they went up 25%. California had a surplus this year because all of the Silicon Valley rich people, their stock values went up, the capital gains were so large that California, in spite of all of 2020, had a surplus in the state. Isn't that crazy? So we talk about narrative. We have companies who, the carbon footprint of Bitcoin mining, everyone knows that there was 450,000 Bitcoins mined in 2020. There's only 21 million that are ever available. That's why Bitcoin is the greatest Ponzi scheme of all time. Tesla bought 10% of them, 45,000. And the carbon footprint from the Bitcoin that they bought was 4.5 million tons of CO2. Every car Tesla has ever sold in the history of the company is 1.6 million, which has saved 3.5 million tons of carbon. So the purchase of the Bitcoin for Tesla was more carbon by 33% than it has ever saved. That was why when people started talking about that, they all of a sudden stopped taking taking Bitcoin. But again, you have to look to the facts and the data to understand the narrative that's being pushed. Last thing I'm going to say, I want to talk about Exxon, because it's the biggest company that we have, and they just recently had an activist investor. And so again, we talk about this flow of money. Engine number one owned $50 million worth of stock. The cost of the proxy battle for them to get their 3 board members on, does anyone know what it was? It was $30 million. They spent 60% of the entire position to go activist on Exxon to get 3 people on the board. Now, I don't know how impactful that's going to be, but do you think that it was engine number one that actually was giving the $30 million? No. Right? Do we see transparency in where that $30 million came from? And what happens if Exxon starts investing in renewables and solar and wind and starts shutting down fossil fuels, right? If Exxon gets on board, then the $3 trillion of the Green New Deal just magically happens. Anyone else notice that even though unemployment rate in the United States is 5.9% right now, that we still have states giving the unemployment bonus that continues? And have you noticed that every restaurant in the country is now saying, we're going to pay $17 an hour for McDonald's workers? Well, how hard is it to pass minimum wage legislation across 50 states? Really hard. You know what's really easy? Just have to pay people to stay home, and then companies will force the labor to go up. So again, all of these things are the government has figured out ways to use public companies to do their policy decisions by forcing little tweaks, and no one in the media is talking about it. Exxon itself is a great company, but my challenge with investing in oil and gas companies, so I generally don't, is that there's only so many sticks we can drill, right? If I have 10,000 acres, when we were at One Energy, we had 10,000 acres, that was 100 locations. I can't, if I half the distance between the wells and have 200, my reserves are going to be impacted, my terminal decline is going to be impacted, my B factor is going to be impacted, everything's impacted. But if you're a cigarette maker, you can make billions of cigarettes every year. You just need people to smoke them. So the problem with oil and gas is at the end of the day, we are an NAV business. And so the only message I'll say is I am excited about $71 oil. I'm excited about $4 gas. I'm excited about the future of fossil fuels because, as I've shown, it's not possible for the world to move away from them no matter what the narrative is. And as soon as people start seeing through the fact that all of the media is just a narrative, that's not false news, fake news. It is a narrative that is being sold to you, fed to you, so that you know what to think. But Exxon, as great a company as it is, if you do the NAV of its underlying assets, it's worth roughly $20 a share and it trades at 60. So the real problem in terms of flow in our industry is no matter how cheap a company looks on a cash flow basis, the reality is it doesn't have enough sticks to drill. And so the unfortunate thing is we will probably see prices come up, but there just isn't enough inventory in the United States left, which means we're going to have to get our oil from Saudi Arabia, from Iran, from Iraq, from Argentina, from Brazil. And the last time that happened, we had a Gulf War. And so the unfortunate thing is all of this reliance on fossil fuels in the oil world depends on the Middle East. And so I encourage all of you to think about natural gas. Natural gas is the fuel of the future. Aubrey was 100% correct, even though he funded Greenpeace to attack coal. It was a good tactic, right? He was the first one to implement the CO2 is bad. Natural gas is good because we didn't have anyone, and it worked, and natural gas went up to $12. But we have the best natural gas play in the country in the Marcellus, and I am very, very encouraged by everything that's going on in Oklahoma. Like, you have so much rock and you're so unloved by the market that you're going to see private equity, big companies find things to do here because this is a oil-rich and gas-rich basin, and I am very, very encouraged that we need natural gas in the world to power our future. Because without natural gas, we have wind and solar that's totally unreliable, we have oil that's going away and is reliant on third world countries, and we have nuclear, which nobody supports, and coal, which actually does produce a lot of CO2. So I'm encouraged by Oklahoma. I love the people of Oklahoma. With that, I'll take questions. I appreciate everyone's time and attention. I know it was a really uplifting speech. So, right? Yeah? But But let's, that's the data. That's the data as I see it. Thank you so much. Questions? No questions? I love it. Yes, sir.
What do you think, in your opinion, on the resilience between small, mid-cap independents versus the majors having to respond to ESG?
I mean, I think at the core, because of this NAV issue, and because of the cash flow issue, and the flow issue, and the debt issue, again, this is a very unpopular opinion, but I believe there will be 10 large companies left in the United States in the next 3 to 5 years. And so you're going to see everyone sucked up into these super monoliths who can do ESG, who have a low cost of capital. And at the core, if we were smart, every company should pay off all their debt, because banks might just withdraw it. But you know that like the BlackRocks of the world have already bought all the carbon credits. Like, isn't it ridiculous that not cutting down a forest gets you carbon credits, but then they can cut it down the next year? Or Impossible Meat makes fake meat with cows that don't exist. And there are people who are talking about selling carbon credits for the avoidance of cows. This is a real thing, right? So in order for anyone to deal with that, like, you have to be big. And so I talked to Chesapeake today, I talked to Devon today. Like, at the core, I think Chesapeake and Devon are actually winners, and they will vacuum up all the small companies. And then what they should be doing is they should be using equity to get more cash flow, and then taking all of that cash flow, and instead of doing what Pioneer did with their variable dividend, so they announced their Q2 today, and they have 80% of their free cash flows being paid out to investors in dividends. Cool, but what they should be doing is using all of that to pay down debt. And then once they've paid down all their debt, they should buy back all their stock. Because private companies can't really be manipulated. You think Gary Hildebrand at Hillcorp really cares about any of this stuff? No, every time BP says, I want to cut CO2, I'm going to sell my Alaska assets, Gary goes, yep, big B, I'll do that. So I think we have to be big, public, and then private. And we'll see more Hildebrands, and then I think we'll see Chesapeake, Devon, Exxon. If you want, like, my favorite speculation, EOG is running out of inventory and have the best onshore business, I think, in the whole country. They run supply chain, they run logistics, they do amazing. Can you imagine if EOG's employees got their hands on Exxon's assets? So if I were Exxon, I would buy EOG, fire all my staff, and have EOG run my onshore US. Super popular. I'm very popular when I go to EOG. Other questions? Okay. I appreciate everyone. I'll be around. I have a couple books. If anyone hasn't read the book, I have 4 books I'm happy to give to. I don't know what the criteria is. Like, if you're less depressed from this speech than me, I guess that would be one. But come up and see one if you want to read it. Otherwise, follow me on LinkedIn, Hot Take of the Day, listen to the podcast, and I really appreciate everyone paying attention. Thank you.
I'm not that tall, so anyway, thank you all for coming. It's been a great evening, and thanks, David, again for coming down from Denver. We really appreciate it, and we'll see y'all next time.